and welcome to A Chef's Journey through the Alexander Valley. I would like to thank the Alexander Valley Wine Growers Association for inviting me to moderate this wonderful series. This has been a 6-week experience every Thursday, and believe it or not, we only have one more next week. So please go to alexandervalley.com.org rather, follow us on Facebook, and join us next week for our final installment. It's been a lot of fun, and you can still order all of these wines from Gary's. They have the kits available, the mixed cases, the recipes, the tasting notes. It's really fun, so please check that out. Tonight I am joined by 3 amazing winemakers and 1 great chef. We have Jim Ricards, who is the owner, farmer, winemaker, the J in J Ricards. Hi, Jim.
Hi, how are you? Delighted to be here.
And I have Justin Sedenfeld, who is the director of winemaking for Rodney Strong Vineyards. Hi, Justin.
Hi, how are you everybody tonight?
And Jake Hawks, who is the owner and winemaker of Hawks Wines.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And last but certainly not least, we have Chef Mateo Granados, who is the chef owner at Mateo's Cocina Latina in downtown Healdsburg. Hi, Chef.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being part of the little journey we do. And it's fun for you guys to make the time to come and join with me and talk about wine and food. Thank you for that time.
So a little kind of a brief history of the Alexander Valley. So Cyrus Alexander was the first farmer to grow wine grapes, and he arrived in the valley in 1840. This is essentially 15,000 acres of grapevines that extends from Cloverdale down to Healdsburg, basically following the Russian River. It's a really beautiful place. It's known for Cabernet Sauvignon. And what's really fun about tonight is we have 2 grower winemakers, Jake and Justin, who between Rodney Strong and Hawks were some of the first growers of Cabernet Sauvignon in the valley. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about some of that history and the experience with Cabernet and the different styles that we make here in the Alexander Valley. And of course, you'll notice your first wine, which is the Rosé of Grenache. So we've got a couple kind of different varieties too that grow here that we're working with. So please get your wines open, pour a glass of the wonderful Rosé. And if you have the resources available, I do recommend decanting the Cabernets. If you can, they benefit from a little oxygen for sure. So with that being said, cheers. And Jim, you're going to kick us off with this really super tasty rosé. And Jim, just by way of introduction, has been farming grapes for 4 decades, including one of the oldest Zinfandel vineyards in the country.
Thank you. Today I'd like to talk about a little bit about rosé. And rosé is kind of a very misunderstood, wine style. And it's really got to remember that it's a wine style, not a specific grape. And rosé as a method is basically red grapes that are made like a white wine. In other words, they're pressed off early as juice and then fermented, versus red wine where you crush the grapes and let them ferment together with the skins and the seeds. Well, what makes the color is basically during the process of pressing off the juice, some of the red skins bleaches into the wine, and that's what you get. Now, basically, what's important to understand about rosé is that you see 2 versions of rosé basically out there. And one is rosé by intent. In other words, you started out with the idea that this is what you're going to do. The next is the view of saunier rosé, which is French for bleeding off red juice in order to concentrate more of the flavors. And this rosé was a rosé by intention. In other words, we picked the fruit early while it still maintained that just a crisp, bright fruit, and also retain that bright acidity that is so prominent in the wine itself. You get this gorgeous fruit component of the aromatics, and at the same time, you get that kind of strawberry, raspberry kind of fruit component, and that beautiful acidity that makes it just a wonderful, wine to pair with a lot of foods. And I have to say, Mateo's done an extraordinary job of pairing that with the pork bellies. Unfortunately, I'm gone. I'm calling in from Washington State, where I'm out on my vacation. But my wife Eliza went to the restaurant and sampled it, and she had one of the most extraordinary experiences that she's had. She and I have to quote her. I've got to put on my glasses, even though they glare. I'm glaring at you. Okay. And she said that, this is what I quote her. And she said, every taste bud exploded on my tongue. Smoky, salty, sweet, acid, tart, bitter. The meal was rich, but without that kind of without being fatty or greasy. It was a perfect match with the acidity, with the wine, and the fruit punch of the wine really made up a tremendous balance with the wine. It was really it was pretty good. My only regret, I wasn't there.
Jim, thank you. And I think this is a good time to point out that Mateo is going to be serving the dishes that we're talking about tonight with the wines at Mateo's all weekend. So if you are in the area, definitely come check it out and try these wonderful dishes with this wine. And Jim, I just want to kind of pick up on something that you said about the flavors and the acidity in rosé. And I think that's, as a sommelier, that's what I love about rosé, is you get those kind of red, savory, herbal flavors, but the freshness and the acidity and sometimes saltiness, I get a lot in rosé, which just makes it so friendly at the table. And Jim and I were talking earlier about how rosé is so great year round, because in the winter, seafood and citrus are in season, which is what you want to eat with rosé. So kind of taking it out of that seasonal stereotype and really enjoying it all year. So Mateo, please tell us about this dish that Jim and Eliza were raving about.
When we taste the wine the first time, that's exactly what we were talking about, the balance of the acidity, but most importantly, how rosé can come to be all year around, and except people say it's only for summer, but we wanted to show as well it can be done even in winter. But you gotta develop a dish like the cured cabbage with the Japanese vinegar goes and, like, for example, a technique of cooking the belly in water for 3 hours and replacing it to don't be greasy, to be no interfering with the acidity, because your tongue will be rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling, and it's not going nowhere. And this one, because the fat is being technically like waxed up, when you slow roast it, doesn't have texture, all right? It's just doesn't get greasy, but you palate in the playground between the chili and the honey, how it's coating all those acidities, to putting it in your palate and defining each flavor. And like when I do this, like we said last time, when I do my dishes for wine pairing, I laid up food. This one is all laid up, and the bottom has the bitter. It's a bitter lettuce we put in the bottom, because the acidity of this wine will make the wine, like Courtney was saying, very pretty, very crisp forward, and shows you can be eat and drink in winter rosé.
Yeah, thank you. And I love that we had a picture of the dish with the wine because I think visual pairings matters too. And rosé is so fun because of the color and it looks pretty at the table. And so that was just really a delightful presentation. Thank you, Matteo. Jim, I wanted to jump back real quick to you, and I want to hear a little bit about the vineyard and where the Grenache is farmed, and just briefly about the two other grape varieties that are in this wine.
Sure. I have to say that, for, everyone growing Cabernet, early growers of Cabernet, well, Grenache is one of the early planters in the Alexander Valley also. There are a couple of vineyards down your way, Jake, that were planted in the late 1800s, early part of the century with Grenache. So it's not new to us. The vineyard itself is located a couple miles north of Geyserville. And it's got a really nice northeast exposure to it and hillside. What we do and how we manage it and what makes a farmer smile is that basically what we do is we thin the crop early and most of the time, Grenache is an overproducer. It produces too much fruit for the leaf area. And what we do normally, what growers do is put fruit on the ground. Well, what I decided to do was pick it early and thin the crop early so that we can make a rosé from it and leave a part of the fruit left, part of the crop left for making red Grenache. And so this was truly picked early. And it's really quite nice that way. And the it's just a beautiful style, I think, and really works well for Grenache in both ways, in both as a rosé and as a red wine.
Thank you, Jim. And I'm not the only one who was curious about the Alliatico.
Oh, darn it. Okay. Thank you, Courtney. I forgot all about that. Basically, the other secret ingredient here is Alliatico. Alliatico is an obscure variety from southern Italy, and I don't know openly but one grower in California that grows it, and that's the Ceres Ranch out in Sonoma, and that's where we source the fruit from. I don't grow it myself. And it is a very, very aromatic varietal and traditionally used in Italy as a dessert wine. Here, we've made it as a rosé, and we typically blend a little bit in the AVA Ray because we want to bring in a little bit of watermelon. You taste that watermelon in there, and that is Alliatico. Alliatico is like a watermelon in your face, and as a rosé, we make them both. But adding a little bit to the Grenache adds that little hint of watermelon to the strawberry and and it's kind of like a fruit salad, I guess.
Is Alliatico a white or a red grape?
It's a red grape, and it's actually I understand that they are in northern Mexico. They are doing Alliatico and making it into a red wine. It's still red wine.
Yeah.
So do you press it at the same time as the Grenache? Does it just gets all pressed together and co-fermented?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, pretty much. That's probably if and interestingly enough, um, Alliatico is thought to be related to Muscat. Okay, in the Muscat family. Eliza did that research a while back and found out that it was thought to be in that Muscat family. That explains its tremendous aromatics. As we know, the Muscat family has amazing properties for aromatics, and just taking over a wine that's been mixed into, and it's pretty phenomenal. And so we have to be careful with this. We don't want to we don't want to ruin or I'd say ruin, but take away the flavors of the Grenache. We just need to add a little nuance to it.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Jim, so much. And thank you for making such good wine. We got a question about decanting, so I'm going to address that real quick before we go into the Cabernets. So one of our guests asked, why is it helpful to decant wine? And does the age of the wine play into it? So real quick, there's basically two reasons why you decant your wine. Young wine is in a semi-reductive environment, so the cork does allow some oxygen into the wine, which is what allows it to age nicely over time, but it still has been more or less in kind of a reductive environment, so protecting from oxygen. And so opening it up and decanting it and giving it some air just allows all of those lovely wine aromatics to start to come out. The tannins kind of soften and integrate a little bit more. One of my mentors described it as like being on a long car trip in like a tiny car, and then you just have to like get out and stretch your legs. So that's kind of one of the reasons for young red wines is to stretch its legs. And then the second reason we decant is with older wine to essentially get it off of its sediment. And that's usually something you want to do just before serving it, because older wines can sometimes fall apart with oxygen because they've been aging for such a long time with that cork breathing. So it's already kind of like decanted itself over the years that it's been in the bottle. So those are kind of the two reasons that you would decant. With wines that are about the two ages that we're going to be tasting, there might be some sediment. So you can kind of be a little bit cautious when you decant. But with really young wines, you can be pretty aggressive with getting oxygen in there. So thank you for your question. All right, with that, let's drink some Cabernet. So we have the 2017 Rodney Strong Estate Cabernet up next. And to talk about Rodney Strong, we have Justin Suddenfield, who is the director of winemaking. Rodney Strong was founded in 1959 and now farms 4 different estate vineyards on the benches and the hillsides above the valley floor of the Alexander Valley. So welcome, Justin.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. So the wine that we're enjoying tonight is our 2017 Alexander Valley Cabernet. This wine is in our sort of our middle tier of wines that we produce. And our goal with this is really to showcase our place, which is Alexander Valley, which really brings a lot to the table, in my opinion, for Bordeaux varietals. We do own multiple sites within the Alexander Valley, growing everything from Sauvignon Blanc to Zinfandel and an amazing selection of Bordeaux grapes, predominantly Cabernet. This wine is coming from about 60%, 65% is coming from those estate vineyards. And then the balance we source from family farms, the Murphys and the Hannahs and the Bracciolinis, who have been growing grapes almost as long as we have. And the goal is to really showcase what the valley can bring to the table. And that is a beautiful gamut of fruit. Due to the fact that the valley is long and narrow, when you're working with fruit in the southern part of the valley, you gain really cool blue and red fruit characteristics like blueberry and raspberry. And then as you work your way north through Geyserville and then up to Cloverdale, you start to gain more black characters. So when you get to Geyserville, you're more red cherry. And when you get to Cloverdale, you're more black cherry and black raspberry, little bits of cassis and licorice. And so when you can strategically select only hillside vineyards, typically we like to work with fruit that has a western, a southwestern aspect in the Alexander Valley. That gives us really great morning exposures for the prime ripening parts of the day. It allows us to achieve what we call physiological ripeness, which means that we're not necessarily just looking at sugars, and we're looking at the tannins evolving properly, so they're softer and more developed, and the skins release that color and that structure that much more readily, so we can be very gentle in our process of how we make this wine. We take all this amazing fruit, we put it into ferment it pretty cool, about 72 degrees. That allows all the really delicate fruit qualities like the violets and some of the spice qualities like aniseed and linden to stay in the wine. Those are very volatile, and if you ferment too hot, those can blow off. So we ferment it pretty cool, and then we go right to barrels within about 24 hours of draining off of the skins. This is only free run wine. No press wine makes it into the Alexander Valley Cabernet, and so that really natural drain off gives it less aggressive tannin structure, but more purity and more intensity of flavor. We age it in those barrels for about 18 months, and then which are all French, about 50% new. And we like to use fairly low impact barrels, typically seasoned for 30 to 36 months, air dried wood, which gives it a very elegant, delicate oak profile. And that just pops the fruit that much better. So that is our Alexander Valley Cabernet. As you guys alluded to, Rodney Strong has quite a history in the Alexander Valley. Rodney was one of the founding members of the AVA in 1983 and was really one of the first to grow hillside Cabernet with our Alexander's Crown Cabernet, making it the first single vineyard wine to be produced in the Alexander Valley, and really launched Alexander Valley into stardom by being the first wine to be reviewed by Robert Parker to achieve a 90-point score. And he liked the wine so much that he put it on the cover of his inaugural issue of the Wine Advocate. And so it sort of showcased to the world that Sonoma County has arrived in the world of Bordeaux varietals. And today, with countless other amazing producers, we're really showcasing how good we really are.
Thank you, Justin. I have a question from Susan about kind of the Rodney Strong portfolio of cabs. So you mentioned that this one is in the middle tier, and she would like to know, and I'm sure others would as well, how does it differ from upper or lower tier cabs, and how does this kind of fit into the overall Rodney Strong lineup?
Absolutely. So yeah, so we try to produce wines that are very place specific. And so when we make our entry level Cabernet, it's called Sonoma County Cabernet. And we do source for that wine from all over Sonoma County. So you're going to get a big chunk of Alexander Valley there, but there's also Knights Valley, Russian River, and Dry Creek Cabernet found in that blend. That wine is meant to be consumed much quicker. So it has a little bit of Merlot blended into it to soften it up, a little bit less barrel age. And so typically, that wine would be consumed, quickly after purchasing. When you step up into the Alexander Valley, we go to a place-specific wine, which is in this case, Alexander Valley. We also do a Knights Valley Cabernet in that tier, which is a focus on the Knights Valley AVA. And within that Alexander Valley wine, it's only hillside vineyards, it's all French oak, it's only free run juice. So it's just a little bit of a cut above. And then as you continue to go up our portfolio, you go into our reserve wines, which would include our 3 single vineyard Cabernets, which is the Alexander's Crown, Rockaway, and Brothers. Those 3 sites really tell a beautiful story of the benefits of climate and elevation. You have 3 wines that are all Cabernet grown in 3 sites within a single AVA, but due to the elevation and the climate, which changes as you go north, you get a different fruit profile, a different tannin profile, and really different wines. And they're an amazing deep dive into the benefits of terroir. Below that, We make a reserve Cabernet, which is pure 100% Cabernet. And that wine is really a focus on the pinnacle of what that variety can be. If you were to really close your eyes and imagine the grape and why everybody loves it, why it's the king of wines, all of those descriptors that come to your mind, structure and power and black fruits and chocolate and mocha and vanilla and all those amazing characteristics weave together in that reserve bottling, which is our way to show you the purity of what Cabernet should be in a glass. So those are our reserve wines. There's also some blends in there. There's our Symmetry blend, which I have sitting here, which is based in Cabernet, but incorporates the other four Bordeaux varietals, which are Malbec, Petit Verdot, Cabernet Franc, and Merlot. And that kind of rounds out our portfolio for Cabernet.
Great, thank you so much. Kind of a technical question here, so let's not get too deep into it, but if you only use the free run juice, what do you do with the pressed juice?
So the pressed juice becomes a component of our Sonoma County wine. One of the benefits for that is it gives it some added structure in the mid palate for our Sonoma County wine, because a lot of the tannin can come out during that, that process. Once we do press that juice off, we let it settle, and then we run it through a high-speed centrifuge to pull out a lot of the bitter components. So it's really kind of a nectar, if you will. It's almost, imagine like a self-leveling, a floor that needs to be leveled, and you pour some self-leveling floor slurry over it, which kind of fills in all the cracks and makes that floor perfect. That's what a lot of this press wine can do to our Sonoma County tier, is it really kind of balances everything out and fills in any sort of missing pieces. And so it's a really fun tool that we use. We invested a while back in a new, well, it's not new, but new for the United States, which is it's called sequential pressing technology. It's a bladder press that can use quite a lot, hold a lot of fruit, but it functions as if it's a basket press. So as it's pressing, it never deflates and rotates through its entire press cycle, just as a basket press would do. So we're just pressing everything straight down. And as you're doing that, you're building a filter cake, if you will, a cake of skins that are compressed. And so all the juice that comes through that filter cake and comes out outside the press is really beautifully clean, because all the chalky stuff that people don't really like in pressed wine gets stuck in that filter cake of skin. So it's very natural. And all we get is this gorgeous pressed wine out of that process.
Awesome, thanks so much. Let's talk about some food. So Chef Mateo, please tell us about your pairing with this wine, which was the filet mignon and roasted potatoes.
Yeah, well, we'll come up with when I taste the wines, you know, where Justin was saying, you know, I taste the one with layers, and that's how I took the decision to get the filet mignon, get ancho chili, guajillo chili, toasted in a flat top, put it in a salamandra to dry, put it in a coffee grinder, coated with sea salt, and that way it can be standing up to the wine and enjoying all the, what I did, I put in a little bit of the house-made sour cream. We make a little sour cream in here, and we infuse it with the powder of the chili as well. Put it in the bottom, and that way when you cut the filet mignon, the bloody part soaks with the with all the juices in the bottom of the plate, and that way we get the roasted potatoes with rosemary. You know, a sentence with rosemary, but not overpowering the wine as well. They all go gently because it's laid up as well. And then we have a little spear of Merida's Garden Chinese cabbage, steamed, Chinese steamed, and scented with a little bit macro plain Meyer lemon, which is as aromatics as aromatic and blossomy flavor, smells and flavors as well. And then we decide to put the filet mignon totally without putting demi-glace and how this been normally paired. All right, this means the blood of the filet mignon, it was making the sauce, and this wine, if you think about it, this wine needs like blood. Like when you drink the wine, it needs a steak or meat or lamb chop or beef to stand up to just suck the flavor of the wine, and you just start, and your palate start rolling around, and you can taste what Justin said, the layers of the pressing of their wines.
Sounds so good. Thank you. And I always like to remind my guests at restaurants where I've worked that the tannin and protein bond together. So when you have something fatty and then you have a wine with a lot of tannins like Cabernet, it kind of like cleans up your palate and kind of refreshes it. So like you want another bite, and the wine keeps each bite of food exciting and compelling. And then your mouth doesn't get so dry from drinking the red wine. So these wines for me are definitely food wines. So thank you, Chef.
You're welcome.
And real quick, Justin, I want to throw back to you for one quick question. I have a nicely aged 2013 Symmetry. Thoughts on when to pop the cork?
So that is what, 7 years old now. So I'd say anytime now, or between now and another 10 years would be great. 2013 vintage was a fairly warm vintage, so there was a lot of structure in that wine. And so it can definitely handle more age, but it would probably be tasting really good right about now. We're doing, coming up, we're doing a library tasting of Symmetry for people that sign up through the winery, and we'll be showing 2008, 2012, and 2016. So we're trying to show like a 4-year gap between each wine. And so while we were choosing which wines we had opened up an entire vertical going back to 05 to current. And I do remember that the 13 was showing very, very nicely. So I would say if you have a good time to drink it, like Thursday night at 5:31. All
right, thank you so much. All right, we're going to go on to our third wine. And I think if you do have an extra wine glass and you're willing to do a little extra dishes later, I think it would be really fun to kind of have the Rodney Strong and the Hawks Cab side by side to kind of go back and forth. I think it's a great way to learn about wine and kind of develop our palates is by tasting two sort of, similar in the same ballpark wines. Here we have two Alexander Valley Cabernet Sauvignons side by side. So please take a second to do that if you would like. And then we have Jake Hawks here, and just kind of on a personal, semi-personal, professional note, Jake was actually the person who really introduced me to Alexander Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. So I was kind of a young wine director at a restaurant in downtown Healdsburg, and Jake came in with his wines, and we did some really fun Magnum nights where we tasted some aged Cabernet Sauvignon and from Magnums, and it was just really eye-opening to me, who was kind of obsessed with France at that time, studying for my sommelier exams, to see how beautiful and elegant and age-worthy and also powerful Cabernet Sauvignon from the Alexander Valley can be. So thank you for that, Jake. And his family, his father planted Cabernet in 1971, maybe 72. And this is where Jake was born and raised, and now returns to start his family's wine label. So welcome, Jake.
Thank you. Yeah, we say 1972. I don't know if it was, my folks bought the ranch I grew up on in 1971, and they probably didn't plant Cabernet until the next year, although I don't know that anybody can exactly remember. I just want to take just a second to say thanks to everybody for being here. I did have a chance to go to Mateo's and taste my companion's wines with his food, and I think the wines are delicious, and I thought the food was really amazingly well paired with them. And yeah, Justin, your Cabernet is delicious, and I think Courtney's right. It's to me, if you taste these two Cabernets side by side, I hope that they encapsulate what I like about making wine, and my essential philosophy that wine should not necessarily all be the same, and that there is not necessarily one version of good wine. Because I really admire what Justin does, and I really like his wine. I think it's very different than what I do. My family, Hawks, came to Alexander Valley in the early 1970s and without a notion of producing wine. My dad and mom are both from New York City, and my dad had spent time farming in the West when he was a kid through a strange series of circumstances, and just fell in love with the way that Alexander Valley looked and decided he wanted to plant vineyard here. And this was a good 10 years before Alexander Valley as an appellation existed. So they planted the vineyard I grew up on, which was a prune farm. They bought on Chalk Hill Road. They bought in 1971 and tore out the prunes and planted Cabernet. And over the course of the next 25, 30 years, they bought and developed 3 different sites in Alexander Valley and started farming Cabernet on all 3 of them. And for the first 30 years of our family's business, we sold grapes to other people. So we started out selling our grapes to jug wine at Gallo and ended up selling it to everybody else, from jug wine to let's say Cardinal, which is a big fancy label in Napa, or Silver Oak. Then after 30 years of growing grapes for other people, we started making our own wine. And our first vintage was in 2002. And we now make Cabernet, a single vineyard Cabernet from each of our 3 different vineyards. And then the Cabernet that we're drinking, that we're tasting tonight, which is a 100% Cabernet that is a blend of fruit from all 3 of our estate vineyards. And what was I supposed to talk about that? Also, oh, how much of it we make? About 1,000 cases on an annual basis, but that varies a little bit. We farm enough grapes all told to probably produce something like 25,000 cases of wine. And between the Chardonnay, the small amount of Chardonnay, small amount of Merlot, and the 4 different Cabernets that we produce a total of about 3,000 cases of wine. So it's kind of a cherry picking process for us. We sell, again, probably 75% of what we produce, and maybe a little bit more, maybe 80% of what we produce, and keep 20-25% for ourselves. And the Cabernet that you're tasting tonight, which is the 2016 Alexander Valley, again, is sourced from all 3 vineyards, and the blend of the 3 different vineyards changes depending on the year. I don't have a vision going into a vintage of what I think this wine ought to taste like. Other than that, I really want it to be typical of Alexander Valley, and I really want it to be typical of Cabernet Sauvignon. And to me, Alexander Valley is typified by a less overblown style of Cabernet. And it's hard to know if that's a result of the climate here as opposed to the climate in Napa. I think there's a natural comparison to Napa. I've been trying to escape it all my life, and I'm finally just coming to terms with it. I think that if you're drinking Cabernet from California, Napa is the natural reference point. And I think that Alexander Valley differentiates itself largely from Napa by being more balanced, more finesse oriented, more delicate. And so I look for that in my wines. I'm not necessarily trying to make the biggest, darkest, most tannic wine you possibly can. And I also, for me, there's a textural component to Cabernet Sauvignon that I don't think is shared by other wines. And I actually think that Justin's wine is a really great encapsulation of that. It just has a beautiful tannic structure, both, and it's capable, depending on age, depending on structure, of achieving both a depth and a softness that I don't think any other variety can rise to. So I look for those things, but to me, every vintage is different. And I like to let the vintage and the vineyard speak for itself. 2016 was a super warm vintage here. I actually just did a tasting where I compared it to our 10, 13, our 10 and our 13. And as Justin said, I remember 13 as being a really warm vintage. And when I looked at a comparison to 16, 16 was far warmer. So I think there was a danger in 2016 of things becoming overripe and of us ending up with a kind of raisiny component, a cooked component in our wine. And personally, I hate that. And so I was looking to try to pick the grapes here early enough to preserve a sense of freshness and liveliness and urgency in this wine, rather than just having it feel maybe soft and maybe developed, but also kind of exhausted. And I think that that's a danger in really warm years. And we're seeing more and more warm vintages. And I'm noticing in myself a propensity to want to pick a little bit earlier than I used to in order to try to preserve some freshness. So for me, in this wine, in our 2016 Alexander Valley, I get a lot of bright, fresh fruit. And I get a violet character to it as well. And as my notes here say, yeah, blackberry and plum. I love the blue fruit character of Cabernet, that Cabernet Sauvignon is capable of. And my notes also have say that I get an herbaceous character in this wine, and that's true. I think that that a certain amount of herbaceousness that could be conflated with greenness is just part of the variety of Cabernet Sauvignon. And I think that sometimes we want to make sure that we don't end up with any green flavors. And so what we end up with is jamminess as opposed to freshness in our wines. Oh, and about the oak program and the barreling, typically my wines will spend 2 years in barrel, but I don't have a hard and fast rule where that's concerned either. I just tend to taste the wine over its time in barrel and see where I think it is. And if I start worrying that I'm losing some aromatics, then then I will try to bottle earlier. But typically we're looking at like 18 to 22 months in barrel and almost exclusively used French oak. So I say 30% new oak, but I really don't keep track of it. It's oak to me is like the salt on steak. It's hard to imagine Cabernet Sauvignon without it. And it's easy to ruin delicious Cabernet Sauvignon with too much of it, in my view. And one more thing, and then I'll shut up. I remember Matteo saying that this wine, when we were getting together a couple of days ago to taste it, that it reminded him of an Italian wine. And I thought that's an interesting and an apt way to think about it. It's more acidic. I think it has a little bit more lean and linear profile than most California Cabernet. And yeah, it's got more, I think, is more oriented towards brightness than most California Cabernet. So thanks, Matteo.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I agree. The thing that keeps coming up for me during this tasting series is structure. So that like acid, tannin, backbone of these wines, and then those savory herbal elements of Cabernet Sauvignon that, to your point, Jake, can get lost if it's over ripened or too pruny. And then I also have a comment here from Katia who says, I think we're more concentrated here in the Alexander Valley on gorgeous fruit rather than expensive oak, which can certainly happen in Napa, it seems. So Matteo, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about your pairing here, which is the Marita's Garden Duck. And I definitely want you to talk about the El Caporado, which is a mix of olives, capers, and raisins, which I just learned. And as a reminder, all of these recipes are available on alexandervalley.org. So if you didn't prepare and you're not making these and you want to follow along, please go to alexandervalley.org and you can see the full recipes there. Go ahead, Matteo. Thank you. Matteo, you're on mute.
I got you. Good. Well, I got the inspiration from when I taste the wine. Like Jackie was mentioning, comes that kind of old world, gentle wine to my palate, and me I say, I'm going to take the adventures to do the El Caporado because I'm looking for that sensitivity that wine has. Two different Cabernets between the rum and strong and hot Cabernet. There were two different personalities, which just means I went and I put like you, Courtney, was saying, put it side by side, and the same thing I did. You know, when I plant and I work with two different structures of dishes, which just means I lay it up, and then I put the textures to it and aromatics to be able to play with the wines and at a different level. You know, like I do in the Alcaparado, for example, when you get all the concentration of the bones of the duck with the salty brightness and sugar and the raisins, just turns to an all world type of taste, like cachetole. It comes to be similar than cachetole. And it means this wine embraces and keeps its elegancy going with the flavor of soaking the rice and the olives. It was an amazing experience to me. You know what I mean? It was like, you just keep dipping on it, getting one olive, getting a little bit of the rice and put it in your mouth and have the wine. And they went together. They both sold themselves in a different level to me, you know. I was very excited about the dish and the filet mignon and the pork belly, because two different, totally different layers, structures, and techniques of the winemakers use. And I base myself when I tasted what the winemaker is looking for is exactly what I'm gonna follow to be able to create a dish is totally entirely different than anything else we try. We wanna to make the palate exciting about a new flavor.
Thank you, Mateo. And I want to ask you kind of a question, because Jake was talking about the two different styles of these Cabernets, and most people are now kind of hopefully tasting them side by side. So for you as a chef, as you approach these two Cabernets and we're thinking about what you wanted to pair with them, what was kind of the observations that you had about the differences between the Rodney Strong and the Hawks Cabernet?
You know, it's me, you know what I mean? I think in wine in different way. I went like qualified more like the Rodney Strong, more like American style, and the other one more all world style. But like I said, it's totally different Cabernets, totally different areas, totally different origins of the Alexander Valley, different soils. Like Jackie was saying, you gotta adapt yourself, or you know, you guys been talking about you go far away from this guys are built. It's exactly how my mind was working, and by my training in wine making, that's how I understand. You know what I mean? It's not let's do this dish, find the structure, taste, find that kind of wood, what kind of wood is being in a wine is very important for me. You know what I mean? I don't go. The first thing I say, oh, it's being in wood. It's not being in wood. But my palate is gotta work to be able to say this food can extend beautifully to the wine, and instead of standing up to the wine and just kind of breaking the textures of layers of the wine, we follow technically wood, terroir, and fruit and acid to it. You know what I mean? It's how we start laying out food as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mateo. And this is now, I think, my third tasting that I've done with Mateo as the chef. And what I really appreciate is how he talks about building a dish the same way that winemakers kind of build the wine. So layers, complexities. It's a very interesting way to think about food and wine pairing. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So I want to kind of put something out as we're nearing the end of this series. Maybe I'm just feeling a little nostalgic or something, but I kind of just want to put out a question for Jake and Justin and Jim about what you just love about working in the Alexander Valley and farming grapes and making wine from grapes here. And Jim, we haven't heard from you in a little while, so why don't you start? And Jim, you're on mute.
I know. Okay, well, you know, first of all, as a grape grower for 45 years, you know, I've gone through the gamut of jug wine through, you know, fine wine. And, you know, I've I have to thank Justin. Justin I sold to Rodney Strong and the Klein family for 10 years in the 90s. They're wonderful people to work with, and as a long-term grower, winemaker now, and having our fruit out there is way different. I understand how the Alexander Valley, how unique it is. And the Alexander Valley is such a unique, narrow tube, that fills up at Jake's house and it gets to me later on, 8 hours later, weather-wise, it's pretty unique. And, to have a master, chef like Mateo, who thinks of things a little bit sideways, is pretty exceptional. It's pretty exceptional. And Jake, your wine is really exemplary of South Valley Cabernet, with that big fruit and mid-palate characteristics, and just really wonderful.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, I live on the Sonoma coast, and so the Alexander Valley is very close to my heart. And it is that both the quality of the wine and the grapes, but also the fresh produce and the quality of the restaurants that I think contribute to making this area so special. So
yeah, and it's amazing. There's other folks out there besides us. There's Bernier Farms, who supply some of the most exceptional vegetables and so forth to the restaurant trade. Those folks are, they're growing right here in Alexander Valley also. Pretty exceptional.
Yeah.
From the
Exceptional.
Alexander Valley.
Yeah.
All right, Jake, give me a line about why you left Alexander Valley, you came back, why you love it, and then also please tell us how we can visit Hawks Wine.
So my relationship with Alexander Valley is like my relationship with a human being. It's a love relationship, and it's a lifetime relationship. I'm from here, and I can't separate who I am as a person in the world from Alexander Valley. So it's just in me. And if you want to taste our wines, we have a tasting room here in Alexander Valley, right next to the Jimtown store, about 10 minutes from the town of Healdsburg. And we have just started doing by appointment tasting in our vineyards. So give us a call or go on our website, hawkswine.com, and book a tasting in one of our vineyards here in Alexander Valley. Or you can visit us in our tasting room in downtown Sonoma. We have a tasting room on West First Street, right in downtown Sonoma. So yeah, I hope to see you in one of those two places. And thank you again to everybody. I really do appreciate being in such illustrious company. Thanks, Mateo, especially.
Thank you, buddy.
So Justin, same question for you. Of all the places you could be making wine, what do you love about working with grapes from Alexander Valley? And then briefly, what is your hospitality experience like right now? As you can see, the sun is out in Sonoma County. So we definitely want to encourage people to come and visit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I, for similar reasons to what my awesome company has said, is Alexander Valley gives us such an amazing opportunity to craft wines that are balanced, more so than almost anywhere else. In my career, I've worked for wineries in Napa. I've traveled and been educated by winemakers in Bordeaux and in Australia and in Argentina and Burgundy. And while all of those places have amazing spot in my heart for certain aspects of what they do. The diversity that Sonoma County and Alexander Valley allow us to do, to me, is unmatched anywhere in the world. And so when I had an opportunity to work with not just fruit from the Alexander Valley, but from some of the historic sites that I'm privileged to work with, like the Alexander's Crown Vineyard, it was something that allowed me to craft a wine that really can be more than just a beverage in a glass. I have heard lots of stories of people that either drank it with Rodney or with my predecessor all over the world, that the wine then became more than just what you're drinking. And I remember, and I've been with the winery for 11 years, and the very first thing I did when I got promoted to director of winemaking with my predecessor, Rick Sayer, is we tasted through a vertical of the Alexander's Crown Cabernets starting from 1976 through current. So almost 40 plus years of wines. And it was amazing to hear every aspect, because Rick had made almost all of those wines. And you can tell what's happening in the world by what that wine tasted like. You could tell whether people were, we had a drought. You could tell what was the wet year. You can tell if people were a fan of a specific style, like the Martha's Vineyard wine, where there was quite a bit of eucalyptus. And so all of a sudden they were spreading eucalyptus leaves through the vineyards to try to gain character. And you could see the ebbs and the flows of consumer style. And because Alexander Valley is so balanced, those little details could shine through better than, other spots. And as we've learned in the Alexander Valley, the benefits of our hillsides and the right spots of the hodgepodge of soils we get to deal with due to how young our parent material is, whether they be volcanic materials or metamorphic materials or alluvial valley floor materials, we are learning how to grow the best grapes in the best sites for the right reasons. And pairing that with great food and great company makes Alexander Valley quite unique. As they said, it's more about freshness of fruit than expensive oak, or that's about the farmers and the vineyards more than the fanciness of your tasting room. That said, we have a fancy new tasting room at Rodney Strong Vineyard, so come enjoy it. We used the downtime to renovate our tasting room. We have an exceptional outdoor experience on our terrace overlooking an amazing Chalk Hill Vineyard. You can get a reservation at our website. We have some great educators there that can tell you about our history and about our future, which is also as exciting as what we're doing now, is just getting motivated about what is to come. And so I encourage you all to come. The diversity of wines in our portfolio is quite special due to our access to sites from the Petaluma Gap to the north part of Sonoma County and the Cooley Ranch, elevations of valley floor and sea level soils to 2,000 plus feet elevation. And all of those details really, really matter to make wines that are different and special and exciting to enjoy. So come by, enjoy it, and taste it. Who knows, maybe you'll see me walking around. I'm there more than I'm at home, so maybe we'll get a hangout.
Justin, thank you so much. And yeah, I just want to point out that that Hawk also makes a Chardonnay and a Rosé, and that Jim for J. Ricard also makes some really amazing Zinfandel. So all of these visits and tasting experiences offer a lot to discover, and different styles of wines that will, please you and your person that you're traveling with. So yeah, do come and visit. It's a beautiful place. And then join us next week. So same time, same place. Our last episode of the 6-week series, we're going to feature the wines of La Cienega, Carpenter, and Lancaster Estate, with pairings by the very talented chef and owner of Spencer Sisters in Santa Rosa, Liza Hinman. So please get to the website, order some wine, sign up, and join us next week. It's always a pleasure. I learn so much every single week, and just wonderful to connect with passionate growers and winemakers. So thank you so much, everyone. Cheers.
Cheers.
Courtney.
Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. It's been a pleasure.